Have you ever wondered how far you were going to protect the memory of someone you loved? In the story I will share today, this question is not just a philosophical exercise, it was a brutal reality that turned a woman's life forever. In the shadows of the tobacco fields of colonial Virginia, a story remained whispered by generations. The story of Ruth. What most books never told was as a single night of horror triggered a sequence of events that shivered the foundations of American slave society. While searching old documents for this channel, I discovered details that are rarely mentioned about this case. If you are interested in real stories of resistance that have been buried for centuries, this video will change your perception of what it means to seek justice when all doors are closed. Before you continue, don't forget to leave your like so that more people know this extraordinary story. Get ready to meet Ruth of Virginia, a woman whose name should be in history books, but has been systematically erased. So far, the ruins of Blackthorn Farm still persist in the damp lands of Essex County, Virginia. The stone walls peeled over time are silent witnesses of what happened in the early hours of July 16, 1789. The air still seems dense when the wind blows between the broken columns of the old big house. Local inhabitants avoid passing by after sunset. The metallic sound of a blade is said to be sharp echoes on full moon nights. Ruth's story teaches us that the line between victim and avenger is thin as the thread of a very sharp razor. When all forms of justice are denied, some people create their own method to get the bills right. The bloodshed on that farm was not only the end of a life, but the beginning of a fear that traveled as fire to neighboring plantations. In the rubble of that place, a truth remains buried. No cruelty is unpunished forever. The full moon illuminated Ruth's way that night as she walked toward the main house, the shaving razor hidden on the folds of her dress. What happened later changed the destination of everyone at the Blackthorn Farm. If you want to follow more cases like this, which move with all society and reveal hidden truths, subscribe to the channel so as not to lose any investigation. Blackthorn Farm stretched for 2,800 acres of fertile land in the Rappahannock River Valley. From the top of the hill, the three-story house with its 14 Doric columns dominated the landscape as a temple to the power of the white man. Below, dispersed in a semicircle, 27 wooden cabins formed what the slaves called the hole. Among these structures, the punishment yard occupied the central point, a circle of dirt where the trunk and the pillory remained as a constant reminder. The routine started at 4 in the morning with the touch of the bell. 342 men, women and children came out of the cabins, received a bowl of corn porridge, and were divided into groups. The tobacco fields required thorough attention. Each sheet needed to be inspected, each side sprout removed. Supervisor Thomas Whitley roamed the fields mounted on his black horse, the 9-pointed whip at hand. His whistle cut the air every half an hour, signaling that workers should change their position to avoid rest. In the drying shed, the leaves hung from the ceiling forming a suffocating maze. The heat combined with the strong smell of tobacco created a toxic atmosphere. Wounded hands and marked backs were the daily price of Blackthorn's prosperity. In the words of patriarch Jeremiah Blackthorn, pain is the only language they fully understand. The instruments of control varied in sophistication. In addition to the whips and chains, there were the metal masks that prevented eating or drinking, the tips that made it impossible to lie down, and the most feared, the devil's chair, where the rebels were tied and left in the sun for days. Jeremiah Blackthorn had a book bound in leather where she met a punishment, the name of the punished and the educational result. At night, the sound of the crickets was interrupted by the moans of the injured and occasionally by the muffled cry of women taken to the big house. Virginia's heavy air stuck the clothes on the body, but the real weight was that of hopeless existence. In the weeks preceding that fateful July, the crows began to gather in the oaks near the big house. His incessant grasser bothered so much that Jeremiah ordered them to be killed. But with each bird down, 3 seemed to take his place. Ruth was not like the others. Born on farm 32 years earlier, daughter of Caleb, a man brought from the Gold Coast, and Mercy, a cook born in America, Ruth grew up between two worlds. Since childhood, he has shown exceptional skill with herbs and healings, knowledge that his mother has secretly transmitted. At the age of 12, when fever plagued the farm, it was Ruth who prepared the teas that saved lives, including little Elizabeth Blackthorn, daughter of the owner. This talent put it in a unique position. Jeremiah Blackthorne, recognizing her value, allowed her to learn to read, to study medical books. An unusual concession that came at a price. Ruth became responsible for everyone's health on the farm, and especially the Blackthorne family. This meant access to the big house, the medicines, and without the masters knowing the most intimate secrets of the family. With the years, Ruth has developed a deep knowledge of anatomy and pharmacology. His hands, who knew the exact point to relieve a pain, also knew the places where life flowed most intense. She could identify the main veins of the human body without hesitation, knew the time that different poisons took to act, understood how blood loss affected the senses before death. Ruth's paradox lived in this. The more confidence the Blackthorne deposited in her, the more she witnessed her cruelty. With each visit to the big house to treat a migraine of the lady or the inflamed gums of the patriarch, Ruth listened to plans to sell separate families, the strategies to break the will of the newcomers, the bets on how long a man would hold on the trunk. At night, at secret meetings in the farthest cabin, Ruth shared information with the Council of Elders. His father Caleb led this group that kept living the traditions and planned impossible escapes. The true medicine that practices, Ruth said in the most private moments, it's that of hope. While applying compresses on the torn back of the punished, Ruth whispered, "It won't last forever." While checking the swollen ankles of forced pregnant women to work until delivery, he promised, "Your children will see different days." This was its true power, the careful administration of hope, a more potent medicine than any herb. Leave in the comments. Never give up the truth if you believe justice must reach all the oppressed. The horrors on Blackthorne Farm followed an upward logic, as if each atrocity had to overcome the previous one to keep the system running. In March of that year, when young Elijah was caught with a book of Psalms that he had secretly won from the traveling pastor Jeremiah Blackthorne, ordered his eyes to be burned with red, hot iron. "Reading is a disease that needs to be permanently healed," he said, as the screams echoed through the yard. 3 weeks later, when two 14-year-old girls tried to escape, they were captured just 10 miles from the farm. The punishment, they had the tendons of the heel cut before being publicly whipping. "Now they can run with the thought," Thomas Whitley moved while the young women dragged back to the cabins. In the first week of May, a load brought 7 men from the Congo region. One of them, named Bakari, refused to lower his head in the presence of Jeremiah. The answer was immediate. Bakari was buried to the neck on the ground for 3 days without water or food, while the others were forced to work around him without being able to offer relief. Ruth treated each of the victims. He applied alien ointment to Elijah's wounded eyes, knowing that vision would never return. He cleaned the infected wounds of the girls as they raved fever. He moisturized Bakari's cracked lips when they finally removed him from the ground, deader than alive. With each new horror, something changed in Ruth's eyes. The dark brown of its iris seemed to crystallize, harden. His mouth, once prone to offering words of comfort, became increasingly silent. Your father Caleb noticed the transformation. "You are gathering the pains as those who gather wood for a fire," he warned. In June, cruelty found a new level when a mother, Dinah, was forced to arrest her 8-year-old son for dropping a porcelain tray. While whipping the child, he needed to tell the blows aloud. In hesitating on the 10th blow, Thomas Whitley took the whip and completed 30 whip on the small backs. That night, Dinah hanged himself with a piece of rope. Ruth found her at dawn, her body still shaking gently like a terrible pendulum. For the first time in years, Ruth cried. No silent tears, but hiccups that seemed to tear her chest. The transformation was almost complete. The healer who lived to relieve suffering was beginning to consider another form of healing, a more definitive for the disease that was Blackthorne Farm. The final tragedy, the irreversible blow, took place on a Wednesday. Caleb, the father of our youth at 67, was still remaining as a pillar of the enslaved community. Its strength was not in the muscles, there is long weakened by age and work, but in its prodigious memory. Caleb kept the stories of the homeland, the names of the ancestors of each family, the rituals that kept alive the identity of all. That morning, Jeremiah Blackthorne was visited by buyers from North Carolina. Interested in acquiring quality specimens, they asked to see the strongest enslaved. During the exhibition, one of the buyers noticed Caleb sitting in the shadow, braiding a treadmill. "That old man looks strong," commented casually. "Caleb, it's not for sale," said Jeremiah. "You know more about this land than myself." The buyer insisted, offering a considerable sum. Jeremiah refused again, explaining the value of Caleb's knowledge of planting and harvesting. The visitor, annoyed by the refusal, made a comment that would change everything. "Looks like you let your blacks send you, Blackthorne. On my farm, I don't allow them to be old enough to find themselves indispensable." Jeremiah Blackthorne's wounded pride has become fury. After the visitor's departure, he ordered Caleb called the yard. In front of everyone, he accused him of creating insubordination through African stories. As a lesson, he ordered Thomas Whitley to bring an oak club. Ruth, called the big house to treat a lady's toothache, heard the screams. He ran to the yard just to see his father fallen, the skull opened by repeated blows. Jeremiah Blackthorne, still wielding the blood-stained club and brain matter, looked at Ruth. "This is what happens when you forget your place," he said, cleaning the blood on his own pants. "Burn it before it rots to the sun." Ruth didn't shout. It didn't cry. He knelt beside his body, closed his father's empty eyes, and touched the blood that spread to the earth. With his fingers stained, he made 3 marks on his forehead, a ritual that no one recognized there, but sealed a covenant with much older ancestors than Blackthorne Farm. That night, alone in the cabin he shared with his father, Ruth washed her body with herbal water. He wore it with the only set of good clothes they had, saved for the day of freedom that never arrived. He put on small accounts on Caleb's white hair, each representing a year of his life. During the ritual, Ruth sang softly in a tongue that few even understood there. They were not sorry songs, but old war invocations. With each braided account, a name was pronounced. Names of warriors who fought captors in distant lands. At dawn, while everyone prepared for another day in the fields, Ruth remained by her body. When Thomas Whitley came to pick her up, he found her perfectly calm. "I will bury my father at sunset," he said. "Until then, I remain in mourning." Whitley lifted his whip, but something in Ruth's gaze made him back. Perhaps it was superstition. Perhaps involuntary respect for the woman who had saved her own daughter of deadly fevers years earlier. He walked away, promising to return with Jeremiah to teach him discipline. Alone again, Ruth removed from a hiding place under the floor a small wrapping of fabric. He unfolded him carefully, revealing an English shaving razor with bone cable, a secret that she had healed from the scurvy. The blade, kept impeccably sharp, reflected the light of the rising sun. "Father," Ruth whispered, "tonight you won't travel alone to find the ancestors." Blackthorne Farm was a mosaic of cruelty, each figure exerting its own terror version. Jeremiah Blackthorne, at the age of 59, used his knowledge of the law and his political connections to maintain an impenetrable system. His pleasure was in meticulous control, calculated punishments, in accurate documentation of the suffering it caused. Thomas Whitley, the supervisor, found satisfaction in direct contact with pain. Known for wetting the whip in brine before the whip, I would like to say that the sound of breaking is music for the right ears. Her specialty was to identify each person's breakage point and take her exactly there, keeping her perpetually by the collapse. Mrs. Blackthorne, Eleanor, practiced a more refined cruelty. Under the appearance of benevolence, it offered privileges that turned into traps. It allowed mothers to stay with their babies just to abruptly separate them months later, when the bond was stronger. "Brief hope is more painful than constant despair," he explained to his visits. The reverend of the property, Isaiah Thornwell, contributed to theological justifications for the system. His obligatory Sunday sermons hammered submission as divine virtue. The sky is reserved for those who they skipped their place in the great order of the Creator. He preached as the enslaved were forced to kneel for hours. The occasional doctor, Dr. Hargrove, used black bodies for medical experiments, testing painful treatments before applying them to white patients. His theory that dark skin indicates less pain sensitivity served as an excuse for procedures without any anesthesia. The final catalyst element came in the form of a guest. The night after Caleb's death, Blackthorn Farm received the governor of Virginia for a commemorative dinner. In the eyes of colonial society, the visit represented the maximum validation of the system Jeremiah had built. The event would be celebrated with a feast for 30 influential people in the region. Ruth, temporarily dismissed from work in the fields due to her father's death, was summoned to help in the kitchen. While preparing the family medicines and assisted in the banquet, he could hear the conversations in the dining room. The governor affectedly praised the exemplary operation of the farm. Jeremiah, drunk on wine and adulation, boasted, "The secret, excellence, is never allowing them to forget your place. Yesterday I had to eliminate a harmful influence, an old man who fed dangerous ideas on the younger ones. The lesson was understood by all." The laugh that followed this statement echoed around the house, while Ruth, in the shadows of the corridor, tightened the hidden razor's cable between the folds of the apron. At that moment, all the fragments came together, the system, its executors, and the celebration of its effectiveness, revealing the complete picture that needed to be destroyed. The point without return had been overtaken. Ruth was no longer just a daughter in mourning or an outraged healer, had become an instrument of something older and deeper than any recognizable moral code in that society. Ruth's final fall to the abyss of the determination occurred the morning after the death of her father. With Caleb's body already buried under a tree, Jeremiah Blackthorn decided it was time to reintegrate the black man to routine. In the central yard, he ordered Ruth to be brought to a public lesson. Faced with the whole enslaved community forced to watch, Jeremiah stated, "This woman believes she was above the rules because of her skills. Let's remind her that skills are tools, not privileges." The punishment began with Thomas Whitley tearing Ruth's dress to his waist, exposing his back. The crowd contained the breath. Ruth had never been whipped before, a rarity in that place. Jeremiah took the whip he himself, indicating the importance of the lesson. "Tell the blows aloud. Thank you after each one," he ordered. The first blow opened a diagonal butcher on Ruth's back. She didn't shouted, did not tell, didn't thank. His silence was more disturbing than any reaction. The second blow crossed the first. Blood dripped to the torn skirt. Ruth remained silent, her eyes fixed at a distant point. Furious with the lack of response, Jeremiah intensified the strength. "You will tell you or will continue until your skin comes off the bones." In the fifth blow, something unexpected happened. Ruth turned slowly, staring at Jeremiah in her eyes. In his expression, there was no pain or fear, only absolute clarity, as if finally understood something fundamental. "I see you," he said low but perfectly audible. "Now I really see you." Discanced, Jeremiah backed away a step. In Ruth's eyes there was something new, no submission broken or blind anger, but a calculating calm that made him feel, for the first time in decades, a chill of genuine fear. Recovering, he ordered Ruth to be dragged by her hair around the yard. Thomas Whitley fulfilled the order with enthusiasm, forcing her to crawl on the earth as children weeping and adults looked away. In the end, he threw her into a mud puddle near the stuff. "This is what happens to those who forget your place," said Jeremiah. "Tomorrow she works bent." That night, alone in the empty cabin, Ruth experienced a final transformation. The torn back pain, instead of breaking your will, crystallized it. As he applied his own herbs to the wounds, he made a decision that was not impulsive, but as methodical as Jeremiah's notes in his punishment book. His mind, trained to memorize medicinal properties and human body reactions, now mapped the big house, guards' times, the Blackthorn family's night habits. Every detail he had observed over years as healer of the house became strategic knowledge. "There are diseases that can only be healed by completely removing the cause," he murmured to herself, repeating what she had learned in the medical books they allowed her to read. His decision was not emotional but diagnostic. Blackthorn Farm suffered from a disease terminal called Jeremiah. The next morning, when he got up to work, the others noticed the change. Ruth walked differently, not curved by pain, but erect, with dignity that seemed to challenge her own gravity. Her look, once careful and attentive, now seemed to cross people, as if she were already seeing a world beyond that gift. The structure of the plan was rapidly formed in the following days. Ruth knew she would need help, but she would carefully select her allies. Caleb's death and his own humiliation had created an atmosphere of even more intense fear among the enslaved. Any suspected conspiracy would mean death to all involved. His first choice was Isaiah, a 22-year-old born on the neighboring farm, recently acquired by Jeremiah. Isaiah worked in the stables and had access to the most remote corners of the property. Most importantly, Ruth had recognized in her eyes the same clarity that now inhabited her own. During a seemingly casual exchange of herbs to treat a horse, Ruth whispered, "Would you watch the world burn if you could light the match?" Without hesitation, Isaiah replied, "I would bring the wood." The second person was Hannah, a 43-year-old woman who worked in the Casa Big kitchen. Hannah had lost 3 children for sudden sales and lived in a state of quota-controlled fury. Your access to family food and drink would be essential. "If you could do something before you died, what would it be?" Ruth asked while treating a cut in Hannah's hand. "See hell open its doors right here," the cook replied without lifting his eyes. The third accomplice was Solomon, a 35-year-old man known for his ability to open any lock. Former blacksmith before being sold to Blackthorn Farm, Solomon kept small tools hidden throughout the property. Ruth didn't have to ask Solomon anything. He sought her into the darkness, 3 nights after Caleb's death. "Your father taught me how to tell stars when I arrived here," he said simply. "Say what needs to be done." Ruth's plan was not based on escape or open revolt. The experience of generations had proved that these tactics resulted in massacre. Its method would be more subtle, and therefore more devastating. "We will not destroy only the body," he explained to the 3 secretly gathered under the floor of Caleb's old cabin. "We will destroy the system, starting with your head." In his years as healer, Ruth had learned that death could come in many ways, some fast and violent, some slow and imperceptible. For Jeremiah Blackthorn, she had chosen something different, a death that would be remembered, that would carry a clear message to everyone who came later. "They believe our bodies are their property," Ruth said, opening the small package that revealed the razor. "Let's show them that not even their own throats belong to them." The method received a name: Jeremiah's Last Sigh. Every detail was meticulously planned for 7 days and 7 nights. The date chosen had special meaning: July 31st, anniversary of Caleb's arrival at the farm 40 years earlier. On this date, the Blackthorn family would hold its annual summer ball, when the local aristocracy gathered to celebrate the prosperity built on pain. The house would be full of guests, the security diluted with the need to serve everyone, and the divided attention between multiple distractions. The countdown began. The eve of the ball turned Blackthorn Farm into a scenario of extreme contrasts. In the big house, servants were rushed by tidying up the last details. Silver chandeliers were polished until it reflects as mirrors. Fresh flower arrangements perfumed the halls. Imported linen sheets covered the prepared beds for guests who would remain after the ball. The agitation contrasted with the tense stillness in the cabins. The work in the fields had ended earlier so that all enslaved could prepare to serve at the party. Many stared at the night with fear. The balls often ended with abuse against younger women, called to entertain drunken guests in the farthest rooms. Ruth moved between these 2 worlds with calculated naturalness. In the big house, he prepared the family's nightly remedies and assisted with ointments for Mrs. Blackthorn to appear in his best. In the cabins, he visited sick, taking herbs that, he said, would help spend the night. What no one realized was the mental map that Ruth built with every step. Who would be where, at what time, how long. Each movement was memorized, every noted vulnerability. In the kitchen, Hannah worked quietly preparing the elaborate dishes for the banquet. Among his instruments was a special bottle of Laudano, the sedative that Ruth H. had prepared with reinforced dose of poppy. It was officially intended for the two night guards, who used to receive a little bit to insomnia on party nights. In the stables, Isaiah meticulously cared for the horses that would carry the guests. Under the straws, hid 3 bags with provisions and a small compass. At strategic points from the way to the south, it had marked trees with symbols that only other conspirators would recognize. Solomon, assigned to assist the co-cheers, discreetly tested each door of the back of the big house, confirming which could be opened silently. During the day, he had replaced the oil from a specific hinge, Jeremiah's main room, by a mixture that would hard it throughout the night, ensuring that any movement of the door would produce a revealing creak. At dusk, when the first carriages began to arrive, Ruth was called to Jeremiah's room. He suffered from frequent migraines before social events and needed his usual medicine. "Make sure I will be at my best tonight," he ordered, sitting in front of the mirror while his personal servant adjusted his silk tie. "The governor will be present again, and important matters will be discussed." Ruth prepared the mixture with precise movements, adding exactly the dose needed to relieve pain without causing drowsiness. Tonight, Jeremiah Blackthorne would need to be perfectly lucid to understand what was going on. "This is a special remedy, sir," Ruth said, delivering the bottle. "Prepared with particular attention." Jeremiah took the medicine without looking at her. In the mirror, Ruth saw her own reflection, a silent shadow behind the man who had killed his father. For a moment fleeting, his eyes crossed the glass. Ruth smiled slightly, such an unusual gesture that he disconcerted Jer. Ruth smiled slightly, such an unusual gesture that she disconcerted Jeremiah for a second. But he soon pushed that strange feeling away, attributing it to anxiety for the important event. "You can withdraw," he said dryly, turning his attention to the back vest that would complete his costume. As he left the room, Ruth discreetly touched the small package hidden in the folds of her dress. The razor was there, patient as she herself had learned to be. At 9 o'clock at night, Blackthorne Farm became a show of light and sound. 23 parked carriages formed an imposing line before the big house. The main hall, lit by 200 sails, boiled with silks and jewelry. The orchestra, positioned in the east corner, filled the air with waltzes that mingled with the buzz of conversations and laughs. In the back of the house and in service areas, another scene unfolded. 47 slaves moved as efficient shadows, serving drinks, gathering dishes, keeping the guests satisfied. Their faces were masks perfect with servitude, exactly what was expected of them. Ruth circulated between the two worlds with the excuse of checking if any guest needed headaches or digestion medications. His presence in the corridors did not raise suspicions. The black healer was a well-known, almost invisible figure. At midnight, when the ball reached its peak, the plan began to unfold. Hannah served the laudano to the guards, mixed with the whiskey they used to consume during the parties. In 20 minutes, both would head in their deeply sedated posts. Solomon, after helping a drunk guest to find a guest room, discreetly unlocked the window of the corridor leading to the main room. The modified latch would allow the window to seem closed when it could actually be opened with a simple push. Isaiah, finishing her duties in the stables, tied 3 horses ready to escape into a small clearing 200 yards of the main house. He covered them with dark blankets to be confused with the shadows of the night. At 1 o'clock in the morning, when the party began to lose strength, Jeremiah Blackthorne announced that he would withdraw to rest. Important issues with the governor had been discussed, sealed agreements with handpins, and imported brandy gifts. Satisfied with the success of the night, he went to his room upstairs. Ruth, who watched from afar, made an almost imperceptible signal for Hannah. The cook immediately knocked a tray with crystal cups, creating a perfect distraction in the main hall. While everyone turned his attention to the crash, Ruth slid into the dark hallway. At 2 in the morning, the main room of the big house was silent. Jeremiah Blackthorne slept deeply, the party's alcohol ensuring heavy sleep. Beside the bed, a single candle launched dancing shadows on the walls covered with wallpaper imported from France. The runner window opened without noise. Ruth, now dressed completely in black, moved as a spirit through the family corridors. Years taking care of family health had given him intimate knowledge of every ranging board, every corner that needed to be avoided. The main bedroom door issued the expected creak when Ruth pushed her slightly. Jeremiah moved in bed, but did not wake up, just as planned. Ruth approached with steps measured, the razor now opened on her right hand. He stopped by the bed, watching the face of the man who had destroyed so many lives. In sleep, without the authority mask, Jeremiah seemed strangely vulnerable, almost childish. For a fleeting moment, Ruth contemplated the fundamental fragility of all humans, oppressors and oppressed. The moment passed. Ruth leaned over, and with surgical precision acquired in years treating wounds, whispered in Jeremiah's ear, "Wake up, sir, your night medicine." Jeremiah slowly opened her eyes, consciousness returning in foggy waves. When he finally focused Ruth's face, something in his expression woke him up completely. He tried to sit down, but Ruth had already positioned the razor against her throat. "Don't move," he instructed calmly, as he did when managing bitter medicines. "This is a delicate operation." "What does this mean?" Jeremiah managed to articulate, the trembling voice of anger and fear. "You will be hanged before dawn." Ruth smiled, the same enigmatic smile she had offered through the mirror hours before. "No, Mr. Blackthorn. Before dawn, you will be facing your own sins in the other world." With deliberately slow movements, Ruth explained exactly what she was about to do, as if describing a medical procedure. "The carotid artery passes right here," he said, lightly touching Jeremiah's neckside with the tip of the razor. "A precise cut, and you will lose consciousness in approximately 30 seconds. Death will come in less than 2 minutes. It is more mercy than it has given to my father." The terror in Jeremiah's eyes became something more complex, perhaps the late understanding that his perfectly ordained world had a fundamental failure. "What do you want? Money? Freedom? I can provide documents right now," he offered quickly. "What I want cannot be negotiated," Ruth replied. "I want you to understand, in the last moments of your life, that no human creature can be truly possessed by another. This is the final lesson." Jeremiah tried to scream, but Ruth pressed the razor more firmly, causing a filly of blood to drain through her neck. "For every scream you give, I will cut more deeply, but not enough to kill you quickly," he explained. "The choice is yours. A quick death in silence or a slow and painful death." The patriarch chose the silence. Ruth leaned closer, her fixed eyes on his. "Do you remember every person who had a beam from every family who separated? From my father's skull sound breaking under his hands?" With a unique movement, precise as all he had performed as a healer, Ruth deeply cut Jeremiah Blackthorn's throat. Blood gathered in a scarlet bow, staining the imported linen sheets. The patriarch's eyes widened in shock, his hands clutching his neck uselessly, as life was gone in increasingly weak pulsations. Ruth remained motionless, watching. There was no pleasure in his gaze, only the concentration of those who conclude a necessary task. When Jeremiah's eyes became fixed and empty, she closed them with the same kindness she used with patients who couldn't save. "Go in peace," said softly, "and never come back." Carefully cleaned the razor in the already soaked sheets, closed it, and put it again on the folds of the dress. Then, with the same methodical calm, he went to the door, closing it silently behind him. In the corridor he found Solomon waiting as agreed. "It's done," he said simply. Solomon nodded. "The others are ready." While the remaining guests continued the party on the bottom floor, oblivious to the drama that had unfolded above them, Ruth, Solomon, Hannah, and Isaiah converged to a predetermined point at the back of the property. There, removed from the huts and invisible of the big house, a small circle of stones had been arranged. In the center of the circle, Hannah lit a small fire using twigs and some diverted alcohol from the kitchen. The flames rose quickly, dancing like released spirits. In the trembling light of the fire, the four gathered silently. Ruth withdrew the razor of her hiding place and, speechless, passed her into the fire. Jeremiah's blood, already dry on the blade, burned with a little odor. "The body is released," he said. "Now we need to free the souls." On the other pocket, He removed a small leather bag containing objects that Caleb had kept for decades, symbols of his origins, tangible memories of an identity that the system had tried to erase. A small carved wood amulet, colorful beads, a smooth stone with marks that formed a star map. Ruth put each item carefully around the fire, murmuring words that Caleb had taught him. Then he got up and looked at the other three. "Tonight we free more than ourselves. We free everyone who will come later." Hannah nodded, silent tears running down her marked face. "My children, wherever they are, will feel this." Isaiah, the youngest, seemed transformed, the constant fear in his eyes replaced by a fierce determination. "Where are we going now?" "North," replied Solomon, the former blacksmith. "I know people who will help us cross the river." Ruth looked at the big house one last time, her windows still lit by the continued party, oblivious to the transformation that had taken place in her bowels. "We can't save everyone here," he said with regret. "But what we did tonight will echo. Fear now changes sideways." Before they departed, Ruth performed one last ritual. Using coal of the fire, he drew 3 symbols on their forehead, the same ones he had done in himself, with his father's blood. Protection marks for the journey, signs for others that could help them on the way. When they find others like us, they show these marks and say, "Jeremiah's last breath." They will understand. The small bonfire was carefully extinguished, the ashes scattered so as not to leave traces. The 4 figures moved as shadows toward the horses waiting in the clearing. Before dawn, they would be miles away, following the stars that Caleb had taught Ruth to read as a map of freedom. Behind them, Blackthorn Farm slept, unconscious that at dawn would discover not only a dead patriarch, but the birth of a new type of terror for those who built fortunes about the suffering of others. The news of Jeremiah Blackthorn's death spread as a fire in Campo Seco. The first to discover the body were a personal servant, and Mrs. Eleanor, when she, worried about her husband's delay to breakfast, sent someone to check. The shouts that followed woke up the remaining guests of the ball, creating a scene of chaos that quickly spread through the fields. Local authorities were called immediately. The sheriff of the county, accompanied by 6 gunmen, arrived before noon. The official report, written on a tone paper and sealed with red wax, described the scene with clinical details. The deceased was found in his bed, the throat cut from ear to ear with sharp instrument, probably razor or high-quality knife. The amount of blood in the sheets and the absence of fighting signs suggest that the attack occurred during sleep or in the first moments of awakening. No signs of burglary were found, indicating that the perpetrator had access to the residence. The suspicions immediately fell on the enslaved. The count revealed 4 absences: Ruth, the healer; Hannah, from the kitchen; Solomon, assistant of the stables; and Isaiah, horsepower. 3 horses had also disappeared, confirming the planned escape. Panic spread rapidly among landowners in the region. The governor, still in Virginia, sent an urgent statement to all farms within 100 miles. An act of unprecedented violence occurred on the Blackthorn property. It is recommended to be redoubled surveillance, especially at night. Guards reinforce, check tools that can be used as weapons, limit enslaved access to residential areas. In the following weeks, the event took mythological proportions, becoming something larger than the murder of a man. Letters exchanged among owners revealed a deep fear. The most disturbing is not just the act itself, but its meticulous execution. It was not a crime of opportunity or momentary fury. It was calculated, patient, almost surgical. Imagine that such plans may be conceived under our own ceilings, by those who serve us daily, is a source of deep restlessness. Colonel Walton's letter to Judge Holloway, August 1789. The greater impact, however, occurred in neighboring plantations. Among the enslaved, history has acquired almost supernatural dimensions. Reports whispered at night spoke of how Ruth had performed an ancestral justice, how Jeremiah's blood was offered to spirits as compensation for Caleb's blood. The razor became a mythical object. Some said it was present of an African deity. Others claimed that it was forced the metal of the broken currents of ancestors. The method degolation. During sleep, no alarm, no found of defense, became known as Jeremiah's last sigh. In the following months, reports of similar deaths began to emerge in neighboring counties. A owner in North Carolina, known for her exceptional cruelty, was found in the same way. A slave merchant in Maryland suffered the same destination. The colonial authorities tried to suppress these reports, fearing that knowledge would inspire more actions. But history traveled through the invisible networks that connected enslaved communities, transmitted in coded songs, in seemingly innocent stories, in symbols designed in trees along the escape paths. For white society, the event represented an existential threat to the system. For the enslaved, it represented something deeper. Proof that power was not absolute, that vulnerability was universal, that even the most powerful slept at night. A year after Jeremiah's death, the last sigh had become not only a historical event, but a concept, a methodology, a silent promise that circulated as wind between southern plantations. No one is completely safe when they build their safety about the suffering of others. The search for Ruth and his companions was one of the most extensive ever recorded in the American colonies. The governor of Virginia has allocated considerable resources, establishing a reward of £300 for information that led to the capture of fugitives. Posters with detailed descriptions were distributed to Boston to the north and Savannah to the south. The hunt mobilized not only official authorities, but also hunters of professional rewards that used dogs specifically trained to pursue humans. The most feared of these was Elijah Thornton, known as the Tracker, who boasted that he had never lost a prey in 15 years of activity. The first months of Ruth's escape and his group remain obscure in the historical records. Fragmented reports suggest that they initially separated, moving only at night and avoiding known roads. Isaiah, the youngest, was apparently the first to be captured 3 months after the escape when she tried to get supplies in a small village in Pennsylvania. According to the local sheriff report, the black man was identified by his distinctive marks 3 ritual symbols drawn on his forehead he had unsuccessfully tried to remove. When confronted, he refused to reveal the whereabouts of other fugitives, even under threat of torture. He kept silent until he was sent back to Virginia. Isaiah's fate was sealed in a summary trial. Publicly hanged from the Blackthorn Farm Torero, his body was left exposed for 3 days as a warning. Witnesses reported that before execution, when asked if he had last words, Isaiah answered only, "The last sigh has not yet heard." Hannah was next. Captured 6 months later in Delaware, when an informant recognized her working as a cook in a remote inn. Unlike Isaiah, Hannah had no formal judgment. The group that captured her performed road justice, hanging her into an oak by the way. Before he died, according to witnesses, Hannah spit on the face of the group leader and stated, "You can't kill what is already free." Solomon managed to arrive further, reaching New York and almost boarding a ship to Canada. He was betrayed by a sailor whom he had entrusted to his plans. Captured in Porto, it was sent back to Virginia chained in the basement of a merchant ship. His trial attracted considerable attention, with the prosecutor describing him as the mechanical brain behind the devilish plane. Condemned not only to death, but to a particularly cruel example, Solomon was subjected to the wheel's slick a method of execution rarely used in the American colonies, which consisted of breaking the condemned bones and letting him die slowly tied to a wagon wheel. During the process, which lasted hours, witnesses report that Solomon recited names, dozens of them, apparently from enslaved people he had known throughout his life. His last name pronounced was Ruth. Ruth, the last sigh architect, remained fugitive for almost 2 years. The records of their capture are contradictory and wrapped in almost mythological elements. The official version, recorded by the governor of Virginia, says it was found in the Appalach Mountains, living with a group of native Cherokee and runaway slaves who had established a small, isolated community. The siege of the community lasted 3 days. When the soldiers finally invaded the camp, they found him deserted except Ruth, sitting calmly in the center, as if waiting them. According to the report, the black woman did not offer resistance. When informed that he would be taken back to face the court, he just smiled and to say that justice had already been served. In his possession, we find the weapon of the crime, an English razor with bone cable, kept impeccable. Ruth's return to Virginia became a public spectacle. Landowners traveled miles to see the demonic that had created a terror method. The authorities, fearing that their execution could turn it into an even more powerful martyr, opted for a formal judgment with all the pomp of colonial law. During the process, Ruth remained in silence almost complete, responding to the accusations with, "Yes, I killed him," and refusing to beg for mercy or explain his motivations. His calm disconcerted those present, as one observer reported. The defendant remains erect and serene, as if participating in a ceremony whose meaning only fully understands. Her gaze contains neither fear nor regret, just a disturbing certainty of those who fulfilled exactly what he set out to do. The sentence was issued on June 15, 1791. Death in the fire, a method reserved for crimes considered especially heinous. The execution was scheduled for 3 days later, in the yard of the former Blackthorn farm, renamed after Jeremiah's death. On the morning of execution, a crowd of more than 300 people gathered to watch. Landowners brought their forcibly enslaved to witness what happened to rebels. Authorities from 3 states attended to demonstrate the strength of colonial law. Ruth was brought in a wagon, dressed in a simple white dress. Witnesses report that, even chained and on the verge of death, the fixed gaze was kept at some point. When they tied it to the pole in the center of the wood pantry, they offered it a chance to confess their sins and receive spiritual comfort. His response, recorded by multiple sources, became as legendary as his act. "My only repentance is not being able to live to see the day you will all tremble as Jeremiah trembled. But others will come after me. The last sigh will be that of your world, not mine." When the flames began to wrap his body, Ruth did not shout it as they expected. Instead, he began to sing in a language that no one recognized there, words brought through the ocean, preserved in the memory of generations. His corner continued until the smoke finally silenced his voice. Thus ended the earthly life of Ruth of Virginia. But its story was just beginning. In the following decades, Jeremiah's last sigh has become more than a historical event, became a symbol, a legend, a method that transcended the person who created him. In enslaved and freed communities, Ruth was remembered not as a criminal, but as a manifestation of an ancestral justice. Stories about Ruth proliferate, increasingly elaborate and mystical. Some said that their ashes had been secretly collected and scattered in plantations throughout Virginia, blessing the soil with the spirit of resistance. Others claimed that the razor had never really destroyed, but passed on hand to hand, waiting for the right time to resurface. In Quilombola communities and liberated settlements, songs that, under apparently innocent melodies, told the story of sweet Ruth that packed the Lord in his last sleep. The letters were carefully coded to seem harmless to the ears of oppressors, while transmitting the central message: no power is absolute, no current is eternal. Ruth's real razor disappeared from official records after execution. An inventory of 1792 the list as destroyed after judgment, but persistent rumors suggest that it was stolen by a sympathizing guard and delivered to a resistance network. Periodically over the following decades, reports arose from owners found with a cutthroat and a specific brand left on the wall, 3 symbols identical to those Ruth had drawn in the tests of her companions. Objects associated with Ruth acquired almost sacred status. A small bottle of herbs, supposedly part of his healer kit, became a relic venerated in a liberated community in Tennessee. A piece of fabric, which claimed to be from his dress, was sewn in small fugitive protective bags on the underground path decades later. Academically, Ruth's case was gradually deleted from official records, mentioned only as a footnote in studies on exceptional crimes in the colonies. White historians referred to it as an example of the wild and vindictive nature of the enslaved Africans. The method was classified as Barbara anomaly, without broader historical significance. But in memory popular, especially in the oral traditions of Black communities, Ruth remained alive as a powerful ancestor, as the maximum example of the principle that submission is never complete, that resistance always finds new paths. His name was whispered as a protective talisman, invoked in times of extreme despair. A particularly persistent story tells that on full moon nights, In the ruins of the former Blackthorn farm, it was possible to see Ruth's spirit by walking among the ruins, checking if everyone was fine, healing those who suffer, eternally preparing for the next act of justice. In the words of a documented song in the 1850s, almost 70 years after the events, "Miss Ruth she comes with the moon shining, her shining razor makes her evil end. No, child, if you see your gaze, it comes for the righteous, comes to free us." Ruth's true legacy was not in the specific act she committed, but in the concept she introduced into the heart of the slave system. The idea that fear could change a side, that oppressors could also be forced to live under the constant shadow of vulnerability. This psychological inversion, more than any open rebellion, planted seeds of insecurity that would flourish in the following decades. Ruth's story reminds us that official history rarely tells the complete truth, that for each name recorded in the books, there are hundreds deleted deliberately, that resistance assumes many forms, some heroic and open, some dark and secret, but all part of the same struggle for fundamental human dignity. If you watch so far, it is because you care about these stories that marked our country forever. Leave a comment saying, "I watched here," so that I can meet you and know who really cares about the search for historical truth. Like this video if Ruth's story touched her heart. Share so that Ruth's memory is never forgotten.